If you believe in the power of giving, community, and the strength of the human spirit, this story is for you. Let us know where you're watching from as we continue to grow this family together. In the heart of Camden Street, nestled between the bustling corners of old brick buildings, stood a modest little shop with a faded wooden sign that read, "Jack's Shoe Repair." The shop was small, so small it seemed as though it had been swallowed up by time. The glass windows were streaked with dust, and the door creaked as it opened, but inside it smelled of leather, polish, and the faint scent of tobacco. The shop had seen better days, but the hands that worked there had the skill and heart to turn a broken shoe into something whole again. For the past 30 years, Jack, an elderly shoemaker in his late 60s, had been the only one behind the counter, mending shoes for the people of Camden Street. His once black hair had turned to silver, and the lines on his face told the stories of decades gone by, some happy, some sad, but all lived with perseverance. Jack wasn't wealthy by any means. In fact, he lived a life of modest means. His tiny shop didn't bring in enough money to make him rich, but it allowed him to get by. He lived alone in a small apartment above his shop, and his world consisted mainly of the people who walked through his door, customers he had known for years. Most of them were regulars, locals who couldn't afford to buy new shoes, but always found comfort in knowing Jack could fix whatever problem their worn-out shoes had. Jack's philosophy was simple. If someone couldn't pay, he'd still fix their shoes. He didn't care if they were poor, homeless, or just down on their luck. If a shoe needed repair, Jack would take it in, regardless of the price. He had long understood the value of kindness, of lending a hand when no one else could or would. One of his favorite customers was Mrs. Thompson, an elderly widow who had come to Jack's shop every month for years. She had a pair of old leather shoes that had seen better days, but Mrs. Thompson couldn't afford to replace them. She would come in with a sad smile, asking if Jack could fix the hole in the sole or stitch up the cracked leather. Every time Jack would say, "Don't worry about the cost, Mrs. Thompson. I'll get it done for you. You've been a good customer." Jack's kindness had earned him the respect and admiration of his community, but it never translated into riches. Still, he was content. He found joy in his work, in the act of restoring something that was broken, and in the quiet conversations he had with people who walked through his door. One chilly fall afternoon, a young man entered Jack's shop. His name was Thomas Bennett, a businessman from out of town, and he wore a sharp suit that contrasted starkly with the cozy, lived-in atmosphere of Jack's small shop. The man's polished shoes gleamed in the dim light as he approached the counter. "Good afternoon," Thomas said with a warm smile. "I hear you're the best shoe repairman in Camden. I need a small job done." Jack looked up from his workbench and smiled, nodding. "I'll do my best. What can I help you with?" Thomas placed a pair of well-worn boots on the counter. The leather was scuffed, the stitching worn, and one boot had a sizable tear on the side. Jack inspected them carefully, his eyes narrowing in thought. "These boots have been through a lot," Jack remarked. "Where did you get them?" "They've been with me through thick and thin," Thomas replied, his tone softening as he spoke. "They've got sentimental value." Jack smiled knowingly. "I can fix them up for you. Might take a day or two." Thomas hesitated, then added, "I'm actually setting up a new factory not far from here. It's going to be a large operation, We're hiring hundreds of workers to help make shoes. New shoes. Not like these old things." He chuckled. "But I've heard of your reputation. You know, they say Camden Street's got a special place for people who know how to work with their hands." Jack nodded, still absorbed in his work. "Everyone's got a story, Mr. Bennett. These boots, yours and mine, they all get worn down, but they can always be fixed." Thomas paused, clearly intrigued by Jack's humility and understanding. "You know, I've got an idea," he said. "When we open the factory, I want to make sure we hire people who are dedicated, people who have been overlooked, people who have experience working with their hands, even if they haven't had a chance to prove themselves in the corporate world. You think you could help me find people like that?" Jack was taken aback. A businessman, a man of his stature, wanted to hire people from his community. The very same people who walked in and out of his shop every day? It felt almost unreal. "I can help you," Jack said, a hint of pride in his voice. "I know a few good people who would be perfect for your factory, but there's something you should know about Camden. It's not the money people here care about. It's the heart, the kindness. If you want to make a real impact, Mr. Bennett, you need to show the people that they matter." Thomas nodded, seemingly moved by Jack's words. "I understand. I'll do my best. But I have a feeling Camden's about to change. Maybe for the better." Jack smiled, his weathered hands working their magic in the boots as he added the final stitches. "I hope so, Mr. Bennett. I hope so." Little did Jack know, this meeting would change his life forever. As Thomas Bennett left the shop that day, he looked back at the old shoemaker, the man whose hands had mended countless shoes, but who had never sought anything in return. A thought lingered in his mind, a thought that would soon spark a chain of events beyond anything Camden Street had ever seen. The factory he had planned for Camden Street was coming to life. Workers were being hired, machines were being installed, and the foundation for what would soon become one of the largest shoe manufacturing operations in the city was being set up. Thomas had kept his word. He had been back to Jack's shop multiple times, not just for the boots that Jack had repaired, but to hire people that Jack had recommended, people from Camden who were skilled with their hands, but whose lives had been defined by struggle. There was George, the mechanic who had been out of work for years, Linda, a single mother who had struggled to make ends meet, and even young Samuel, a boy who had dropped out of school after his parents couldn't afford the fees. Thomas hired them all, giving them an opportunity to be part of something bigger than they ever imagined. The factory was booming, and the people of Camden Street were buzzing with hope. For the first time in years, there was optimism in the air. It wasn't just the promise of steady jobs, but the idea that someone cared enough to bring change to their community. But not everything was as perfect as it seemed. While Thomas was busy overseeing the factory, Jack's world began to feel more and more distant. The shoemaker had always been humble, his pride never loud or overbearing. But the growth of the factory and the newfound wealth that came with it began to create a sense of disconnect between him and the people he had spent his life helping. The lines at the shop grew shorter as the factory's success drew people away. They were busy with their new jobs, their new lives. Jack's little shop, once the heart of Camden Street, now felt like a forgotten relic. Jack had never cared about wealth, but he cared deeply about the people he served. And now, with all the changes in the air, there was a painful truth that tugged at him every day. Camden was no longer the place he knew. People had moved on. The city was evolving, and it wasn't the place for him anymore. One evening, as Jack was closing up shop, a familiar figure walked in, a figure he had come to see more and more often over the past few months. It was Thomas Bennett, his face as serious as Jack had ever seen it. "Good evening, Jack," Thomas greeted him, stepping into the small shop. His suit was neatly pressed, but there was something about the way he walked that seemed burdened. "Good evening, Mr. Bennett," Jack replied, trying to mask the weariness in his voice. "What brings you here tonight?" "I've been meaning to talk to you, Jack," Thomas said, his voice faltering slightly. "There's something I've been thinking about for a while. The factory's doing well. We've got hundreds of workers now. But the truth is, it's not enough." Jack looked at him curiously. "Not enough? You've created jobs for the whole neighborhood. What more could you need?" Thomas paused, running a hand through his hair. "You were right, Jack. When I started this, I wanted to help. I wanted to show the people here that they mattered. But now I'm seeing things I didn't expect. The workers are grateful, but they're also becoming disconnected from the heart of Camden. They're working hard, but they're losing their sense of community, their sense of belonging." Jack nodded slowly, understanding what Thomas meant. "I know what you mean. I've been feeling it too. People come and go, but Camden's soul is slipping away. It's not about the factory, Thomas. It's about what we've lost in the process." Thomas looked around the shop, his eyes lingering on the tools that lined the shelves, the worn leather chairs, and the quiet hum of Jack's world. "Jack, you've always been here. You've always been the constant. And now, I'm asking you, no, I'm begging you, to help me find a way to bring that back. I've built a factory, but what we really need is a way to restore Camden's soul." Jack stood still for a long moment, the weight of Thomas's words pressing down on him. He thought about his own shop, the little space where he had spent decades pouring his heart and soul into his work. He thought about all the people he had helped over the years, the ones who had come in with broken shoes and broken hearts. He thought about Mrs. Thompson, about George and Linda and Samuel. They were all part of Camden's story, and in his heart, Jack knew what had to be done. "I'll help you," Jack said softly, the words carrying more weight than either of them could understand. "But not with the factory. We don't need more machines. We need people. People who care. People who are willing to give a little of themselves to the place that raised them." Thomas nodded, understanding now. "What are you thinking, Jack?" "I'm thinking Camden needs something more than just jobs. It needs a place for people to come together. A place where the workers can remember why they're doing what they're doing. It needs something to ground them, to remind them of what really matters." Thomas looked at Jack, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "And you think that's possible?" Jack smiled, his eyes twinkling. "I know it is. We'll open a community center, a place where people can come after work, where they can talk, share stories, and give back to Camden. I'll help lead the charge, just like I've always done. But this time, I'll have more hands, more hearts beside me." The two men stood there in the small shop, the hum of the world outside fading away as they shared a moment of understanding. It wasn't the factory that would change Camden. It was the people, the community, and the connections they shared. And Jack, the old shoemaker who had always mended more than just shoes, would be at the heart of it all. The next day, as the sun rose over Camden Street, Jack and Thomas stood side by side, ready to start something new. Together, they would rebuild Camden, not with the sound of machines, but with the sound of people coming together, with hearts full of hope and hands ready to work. The community center began as nothing more than an idea, a shared vision between two men from different walks of life. One was the rich businessman who had come to Camden with grand plans for a factory, and the other was the humble old shoemaker whose shop had been a cornerstone of the community for decades. Together, they dreamed of something more than just a place for work. They dreamed of a space where Camden's soul could be revived, where the people could reconnect with one another and find purpose beyond the factory's walls. The initial response from the people of Camden was mixed. Some were skeptical. After all, Camden had seen so many promises before, promises that never materialized. But Jack, with his quiet confidence, was determined to make it work. He began by speaking to the workers, the ones who had been hired at the factory, and the people who still came to his shop. He invited them to contribute ideas, to be a part of something bigger. It wasn't just about what Thomas and Jack could build. It was about what the people of Camden could build together. "We're not just making a community center," Jack would say, his voice steady and warm. "We're making Camden whole again. It's about bringing back the connection we've lost." With the help of a few workers from the factory, George, Linda, Samuel, and others, Jack and Thomas began to transform an old, abandoned building on the corner of Camden Street into the heart of the community. It wasn't a grand building, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the love and care that went into every nail hammered, every wall painted, every piece of furniture arranged with intention. The center would have everything: a space for children to learn and play, a place for adults to meet and discuss ideas, a kitchen where they could come together for meals, and even a small library filled with donated books. But most importantly, it would have a room for stories, a space where people could share their experiences, their struggles, and their hopes. As the days turned into weeks, the center slowly took shape. The people of Camden began to pour their time and energy into the project, and it wasn't long before they saw something more than just a physical space being built. They saw their community coming alive again, people connecting over shared stories, shared goals, and shared struggles. But the journey was not without its challenges. There were moments of doubt, times when the workers wondered if they were really making a difference, if the factory had come to define Camden too much for anything else to matter. It wasn't easy to break away from the factory's grip, but Jack never gave up. He knew the importance of persistence, of showing up each day and doing the work, no matter how difficult it might be. One particularly tough day, as the center was nearing completion, George, the mechanic, came to Jack with a troubled look on his face. "I don't know, Jack," George said, wiping the sweat from his brow. "The factory's been good to us, but sometimes it feels like we're just cogs in the machine. What's the point of all this? We work long hours, we're tired, and when we go home, there's nothing left to give. How are we supposed to find meaning in all of this?" Jack, who had seen the weight of George's struggles in his eyes for months, put down his tools and placed a hand on his shoulder. "George, you've got it all wrong," Jack said, his voice soft but firm. "The factory's not the problem. It's just a tool, like the shoes I fix. It's what you do with your time, how you spend your life that matters. The factory's here to give us something. But this community center, that's where you'll find meaning. That's where you'll find each other." Thomas, who had been watching the conversation from across the room, walked over and joined them. "Jack's right, George," he said. "The factory is just the beginning. But the community? That's what lasts. That's what defines Camden, and we're all part of it. This center? It's for you." George looked at both men, the weight of his words sinking in. "You're right," he said quietly. "Maybe I've been too focused on the wrong things." Over time, the people of Camden began to shift their perspective. They started to see the factory as a place that provided for their families. But the community center became the place where they found joy, connection, and purpose. It wasn't just about working for a paycheck, it was about being part of something bigger, something that wasn't measured by profits or efficiency, but by the relationships they built with one another. And then came the grand opening. After months of hard work, Jack, Thomas, and the people of Camden finally unveiled the community center. The ribbon was cut, and the doors opened wide to welcome everyone. The celebration was humble but filled with love. Families gathered, children ran through the newly constructed rooms, and adults shared stories over coffee in the cozy kitchen. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the sound of hope. It was a moment Jack would never forget. As he stood in the middle of the crowd, watching the people of Camden come together in a way he had only dreamed of, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This wasn't just about repairing shoes. It wasn't even about the factory. This was about the people, about the connections that had been restored. Later that evening, after the crowd had begun to thin, Jack and Thomas stood outside the community center, looking up at the stars. "You did it, Jack," Thomas said, his voice filled with gratitude. "No, Thomas," Jack replied, shaking his head. "We did it. Camden did it. I may have had the idea, but it was the people who made it happen." Thomas smiled. "You've taught me something, Jack. I came to Camden to make money, but you've shown me that there's so much more to life than that." Jack nodded, his eyes glistening with tears as he looked out at the street. "There's always more. You just have to remember what's important." And with that, the two men stood there in silence, watching as Camden, once again, found its heartbeat.